Hello, I'm James Bellamy from Spitfire Audio, and we're here today with Chris Benstead, who was the supervising music editor and score arranger on Beauty and the Beast. We've known one another for a long time.
Yep,
I can't remember how long time, worked on some films together before. And I'm going to talk to you today about your work on Beauty and the Beast and the other roles that you've played within the sort of music and film business throughout your career. Beauty and the Beast is obviously a very much loved existing Disney animated movie.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know how you sort of approached the problem of how to sort of bring that movie into the modern era, and how you tackled the existing music and what you changed and what you kept the same, I suppose, from the
Well,
existing.
I think because the '91 movie was so kind of perfectly formed, we wanted to retain a lot of that and a lot of that musical intention, and indeed, you know, the lyrics, the melodies, everything. We wanted to keep a lot of that intact to give the previous audience something to kind of latch onto and to enjoy, you know, to sing along with. So we always had to pay reverence to the existing '91 animation, but equally we wanted to add new textures and new colours, and that was largely achieved with the 3-4 new songs written by Alan Menken at the kind of script writing stage. You know, he was heavily involved with that and working with Bill, our director, and his lyricist, who was Tim Rice on this occasion, to come up with those new pieces. So it was awesome to have those new melodies going forward to work with and to work into the score and to kind of embellish what happened in the animation. But certainly even the original songs, which remained sort of largely intact, we wanted to freshen them up. So we had, we reorchestrated, rearranged, added new little flavours to them, new ways of kind of skinning them slightly. But some of the original orchestrations we kind of used the essence of, for sure, and obviously just re-recording stuff in this modern recording environment that we have now just makes it sound much more full and rich and warm, and obviously getting away from the sort of more over-the-top animation features in the original was kind of key to us crafting it more towards the
more
kind
filmic,
of
sort
more
of more
filmic, more kind of give it more cinematic depth and make it more actiony as well was another key thing.
I was going to ask you about whether there was the sort of the pre-recorded singing versus the live singing on set. So I imagine you were recording live vocals, were you? Or
we always recorded a live vocal, even if we ended up using a section of pre-record vocal just to align to, just to kind of have a rough idea of what they did on set, because sometimes it was radically different. And obviously there was a lot of big set piece numbers with huge wide shots. It's very impractical to do those completely live. Yeah. And those kind of wider shots would often that would be to playback, but certainly the more intimate scenes we tried to do live as much as possible. And what I had great success with is because we had pretty good match on set to what we did in pre-production, was even if there was just the kind of the odd word here and there which I needed to kind of mine from the pre-record, as it were, it works amazingly well. And sorry, and obviously it's the long notes I found as well. Even another thing which I think we did in 9 as well, which was I like to have all vocal takes ever recorded, which was a nightmare, right? But it's so worth it because if the editor then changes a take, and suddenly the lip syncs off, you've
got the reference underneath. Everything's there, or you can use. Exactly, it's useful for little things like breaths and stuff like that, which give a lot more realism, I think, to when you're doing that. So how did you? You said they matched quite well in terms of the sound. Is that a conscious decision you made in advance to try and make them match? Yeah, I mean, we always used. We shot a boom and a lapel in the studio. In fact, I think we shot 3 mics, so we had a lot of options. But to me, it wasn't the mic choice. Obviously, comes into it, but it's more the performance. And one thing that we were very lucky to have was our music producer Matt Sullivan, who's just the absolute master of knowing how much someone needs to project to match a recording.
and just on set just to make it work. So I was amazed how easy it was to cut between those two things. Yeah. And so what I was trying to say is that for the long notes, it's amazing what you can get away with. I could use an older take or use a different live take. It's the stuff that the short articulated stuff, of course, which gives the game away.
Yeah.
So even just splicing in just a few seconds of the shorter, more articulated vocal kind of fools you into believing it's 100% real.
The whole thing's real, yeah. Up to this point, you've kind of been following the kind of traditional music editor's role.
Yeah, to some extent.
But then obviously on this particular film, you're credited as score arranger as well. So how did that come about? That sort of transition from being the music editor to being the arranger, or do you not see a distinction between those two things?
That's a very good point, because a lot of the time, as music editors, as you know, you are arranging something. You're taking a phrase, a transition, and creating something slightly different, maybe from the original intention. So I think what happened is, because we demoed everything in MIDI and that existed in a huge Logic template, in my world. Firstly, that was amazing for editing, because even while we were shooting, the editor Ginny would send me over a scene and say, we need to make a music edit here. So rather than just taking the audio stems, I was able to go into Logic and actually make a proper sensible,
re-tempo possibly, or
exactly stretch, change
a true conform of the
I was able, and those, I should say, those orchestrations some were brand new orchestrations for the new songs which had come via an orchestrator. Some were the 91 orchestrations that I modified. Other bits were stuff that were new that myself and Matt, the producer, kind of came up with. So at that point, it was, because it was all under one stable, it was easy for me to kind of get my head around. And also in the vocal side of it, we did a lot of, which are still in there, a lot of early scratch recordings of the cast singing and stuff, which we just couldn't recreate afterwards in the studio. So it was awesome for me to have that knowledge, because I had a huge Logic session plus a ton of vocal tracks so making 3 cuts in a song is actually a major ordeal just to get that in sync. So, and as you say, then I'll say if I wanted to change the tempo in a given section, well, now I've got 100 audio tracks of vocals that also need stretching. So it was kind of born out of that I was able to do a more musical job, which Bill loved. So each edit, it wasn't just a stereo mix, as I say, it was a very wide thing. And even orchestration wise, if they extended a scene by a minute, if in Mob Song, for example, there's a big underscore section, I think they added a couple of minutes into that song, and when they started editing the films, how do we deal with that? Well, normally you'd have some bad loops of audio because you can't do it. But I was able to take some of the songs, some of the existing underscore, which Michael did, our song arranger, and modify that, and also that was the first time I took a melody. I took a piece from another bit of MIDI from somewhere else, from another song, and added that into the mix and kind of crafted a cue.
So it's arrangement in the truest sense.
So
it's just using the tools
and
that you have available to you to take. It's like music editing, but taken up a level.
Exactly. And to me, like, music editing's, when I do temps on other movies now, that's what I try and do. I try and get it to a point above just, let's throw in some tracks. I try and not only create a continuous mood and tone, but, make it sound like a real score. And a lot of, the way I do that in general is to have a lot of MIDI stuff running as well.
Yeah, I've found more and more these days you see music editors sort of bridging gaps between cues with something that they've actually kind of effectively written, because it's actually a lot easier sometimes, as well as sounding better. It's sometimes easier just to
it's easier and quicker, and if you've got a minute cue that's working and you need to make it 2 minutes, well, obviously you can do the old put it up a tone and repeat it, but that's got limited, that's limited in its capacity.
With a reverse symbol though, exactly. It's not limited at all actually.
But if you can adds a percussive layer to it. Even I sometimes would add a percussive layer to an existing cue, just so that I can take the existing cue away and keep the percussion going. And for 30 seconds or whatever, and then maybe add some bridge and go back into it. So
so it sounds like a real piece of music.
Exactly.
Doing what a composer would do when they've got a theme, but they need to expand it to fill a bit more space or whatever.
I think so, yeah. And I think obviously composers sometimes have issues with temp scores controlling the landscape of the film, but what's interesting to me is that, you know, I think we're doing a valuable job with the temp score, and it is a shame, you know, certainly on some bigger movies they do end up a little derivative. Of course they do. But I think if there's a way of crafting a temp score, if ultimately we're trying to say that the final score might have, you know, the imprint of the temp, surely if the temp score hits everything perfectly and the pacing is fantastic and you know it is more crafted, then we should be thankful for that, because then the end score actually becomes something, even if it's completely different in tone, you know, architecturally. I think that's the main thing about temp scores, it's the architecture
I agree.
of what hits, how big it is, how wodgy it is, or how small it is, and how delicate.
And sometimes which hits are the hits. It's not always obvious where the changes in mood and direction should be until you put a temp score.
Exactly, and
I think it's a helpful shorthand, especially given the sort of the time constraints are getting greater and greater for composers to work on films. I think it's
exactly, and obviously I'm a big fan of people writing original music, and you know, I'd love composers to just be given a film with no temp and asked to do their thing. But sadly, you know, that very, I mean, you've worked with Dario a lot, who I know, who's a big fan of that and does that a lot. And I think, you know, a lot of the younger, hungry composers try and do that, but people want that production value of the great composers in their movie when they're showing it to the studio. So it's impossible. You know, as good as demos are, you know, our demos on Beauty and the Beast, where there's a fantastic thing happened actually, which I think we were recording a song with one of our sort of main cast. And Alan said, he was obviously there in the studio producing, and he said, "Oh, is this the 91 instrumental?" I was like, "No, that's a demo. That's a fully synthetic demo, you know, which we've mocked up and modified and made a bit more robust and added some stuff to it." So, and he was blown away that you could do that, and I showed him, you know, what is capable. But for all those, as you know, for all that for however that gives us the impression of what the film will be, then nothing beats the real orchestra. It's an unbelievable, and I think what it is for me is the space you get with proper I try and do the demos with proper voice leading and proper voicing anyway, but just going from just somehow when you devise the strings in that way, you can't recreate that.
I think it's that thing with samples where you're adding them one on top of the other. You're adding all of you've got sort of lots of layers of the surrounding mics, the surrounding stuff, instead of it all being together and then the rooms around it. I think
exactly. I mean, it's amazing how close you get to it, and there's certain movies I've worked on which, even very small pieces in Beauty and the Beast, where I've had to supplement the orchestra, or in one of the songs I worked Reveal where there's a few bars where it is synth, and no one noticed.
No,
you know. There's a singer singing over it. You're going to notice a singer above some...
You'd hope so. If you've done your job right.
Exactly.
You shouldn't really be thinking, oh...
But it is. But it's an extraordinary tool to... And as I say, as the edit progressed, so in terms of how the arrangement progressed, within the songs I was sort of, again, working with Michael to craft the pieces within the songs, but then... In terms of the score, you know, Bill started saying to me, "Oh, well, I really want to use that melody." The assistant, first assistant editor, Ian, he'd put some temp in there for quite a few bits of it. But Bill was intent on getting melodies wherever he could, and he knew which themes he wanted where. And he said, you know, like as in the songs, are we able to sort of use an arrangement of, say, the theme from Belle or whatever it is in this particular scene? So that's how that then kind of progressed from.
And you start to fill up the gaps between the songs as well.
Exactly. Started to fill those gaps up, and obviously they're instrumental arrangements of those themes. But what was also interesting is. Some of the temp music that Ian added was really a useful marker for what it should be. And sometimes I'd replace that and retemp a scene, and even just just temporarily, because we've got a screening next week, and Bill would be like, well, we need the melody there as well. I'd play one of the themes on top of another temp cue.
Yeah.
And that was amazingly effective.
Yeah.
And also what I found about that, which was really revealing, is that because maybe the harmonic language of what other piece of music I was using in that scenario was slightly different, you ended up with some really interesting
things ways that would never have emerged otherwise,
exactly,
by
really
necessity has sort of produced these strange results.
And obviously then me and Alan spent a couple of months, obviously he did a pass of the whole score, and some sections returning those arrangements I did, and obviously replacing and rewriting a lot of it. So it was at that point it became a real kind of symbiosis between the two of us.
Yeah.
And he'd work with me, and we'd kind of demo everything up. So it was really good fun, actually. And it was nice to have free rein to kind of sculpt the sound of it, because obviously some of the songs are quite like I guess it's a fun moment. It's kind of of course it is. But some of the there's wolves attacking a human.
Yeah.
That's pretty nasty stuff. So
yeah.
The music had to be quite kind of gregarious there.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make it slightly harder hitting than the 91 movie to give. To kind of play into the action movie market a bit more.
Absolutely.
So that was
because
fun.
You're actually in the past talking about the fact you've sort of been a music editor and an arranger on this film, but in the past in your career you've also been credited like a re-recording mixer as well. So
that's true.
You find like for Gravity. Yeah. You were working with Steve Price on Gravity, and then and then had a huge part to play in the sort of the shaping of the sound.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that your career has sort of got all these facets, but actually it's all part of the same.
It is part of the same
service, I suppose.
It is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's what's really difficult is when someone tries and quantifies those roles. So. Yeah, the re-recording thing, as music editors as well, you're always mixing. The minute two things are layered together and you set a balance between those two things, you've mixed something. So, and if you've got a bunch of stems and you're trying to make an edit or you're trying to create a new cue from those stems, you cannot. You're
making choices about. It's inevitable, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. And okay, it's not necessarily first principle mixing. Yeah. But the interesting thing on Gravity was that we had a lot of separation because Alfonso was so keen on listening to every single instrument literally separately.
Yeah.
And it was his idea, not necessarily level mixing all the time. As you know, there's a lot of spatial stuff we did, which took up probably half the mix was panning music in the dubbing theatre to give that immersive experience, and which is amazing. But what is a music editor? And it's the same for sound editors too. If you're track laying a scene, you've got to mix those 50 different sounds. So
most things in a film that people would recognise as a sound is a combination of like 8. Yeah, sounds like somebody shutting a door.
Exactly.
It's
not just one
creaking hinge and a latch and
how many times
and
have you
the
been
sound
in
of that and the corridor vibrating and all those kind of things, isn't it?
How many times have you been in a dub where they're like, oh, can we just get rid of that? And it's
and then they wade through these sort of 72 tracks to pick out the bits that
it was just a match being lit. So I think so the kind of re-recording mixer thing, which kind of again was like an organic growth. I didn't go into that film knowing that's how it was going to end up, but the other thing about it was because I think what it all comes down to obviously is music and musicality, because if you're trying to pan something in a rhythmic, if you've got like 10 elements that you're trying to treat rhythmically in a panning environment, it's got to be rhythmic. It's got to have some bearing to the tempo and to the form of the piece. So it was, if that's moving there and something's moving in a kind of contrary way, how do we make this not just a mess?
Yeah.
And the answer is to do it in rhythm. Yeah. So I was kind of like a panning drummer. You can use that.
Okay. So coming back to Beauty and the Beast, in the film there's a lot of CGI characters, and I know from having worked on films where there's a lot of CGI that stuff tends to take shape quite late in the day.
Yeah.
And I wondered about firstly how you deal with those sort of late breaking changes, and how you deal with issues of lip sync and stuff when you've got animated characters, and also in the when you have the Beast character, you actually had to, I believe, change the character of his voice from the actor's normal voice to give the impression that he was actually this character.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you sort of work with the cutting room and the effects as they come in?
Yeah, very good question. I think what's interesting with this movie was that a lot of the sequences were prevised in the first instance, right? So Be Our Guest, for instance, was prevised and edited pretty much shot for shot to what it ended up in the final movie. Right. And in fact, the music was driving the camera because they were able to take the coordinates of the camera move from the previs and input that into the camera. Oh, really? Amazingly. Yeah. So when I hit play, the camera moved, the lights, however many millions pounds worth of lighting rig, that was all triggered in sync with the music.
Yeah. So it sort of shot itself, really.
Yeah, so true. It was a very tedious process, obviously. Yeah. I should probably say that. It was a laborious. No, I shouldn't say that. It was an amazing process, actually, but every shot was mapped out.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. We also drove the CGI characters. So I don't know how they do it, but they in 3D existed, that they could map them on top of the shot. Yeah. And we could see the characters engaging with the actors in real time, triggered by the music rig, which was truly unbelievable. Yeah. So going into post from that background, everything was kind of pinned down anyway. Obviously it's CGI, so it's got to be pinned down. And the vocals had existed for quite a while. Some of them we re-recorded sections of. But as you said, down the line, the shots tend to get rendered very late, and it does affect sync. Yeah. And it offends sync as well. Yeah. And certainly I think Be Our Guest, because Lumiere, his mouth shape is quite subtle, really. It's a candlestick, which don't normally have orifices.
Don't normally have a mouth, no.
Orify. So it was how do we make that work?
Yeah.
So we did a very late pass of that, trying to just as you know, even with our real actors, I was forever asking the cutting room to nudge a shot 2 frames this way or 2 frames that way. Yeah. But with the CGI, it tended to be that it would be in at each end of the shot, and there was something fuzzy in the middle that didn't quite work. So sometimes that came down to sort of EQing just to fit the mic, so stuff didn't sound quite so projected.
Yeah.
Or just using level even to do that, just the little nuances. But until we saw it on a normal screen, we didn't realise we necessarily had an issue. Yep. But then I spent, me and Robin, our other music editor, spent a long while just going through trying to tweak it. And for the Beast as well, he was so heavily CGI. Obviously that was tricky, because the very last turnover, which was like a week before we finished, it didn't look great at all.
Yeah.
The sync. So luckily it was in music. It was within a musical amount, so we could fix it.
Still fix it. Yeah.
And as you asked about his voice, that was an interesting thing, because the sound effects team and the dialogue team had created this kind of robust, deep speaking voice for him. So it's how do we translate that into the music? We didn't want to record the song like a semitone higher and pitch it down.
Yeah.
We wanted to record it in the real key, because it just
sounds
kind of
a bit weird than it can do. Yeah.
It has a bearing, and so we used a lot of form and change software to come up with a little recipe which kind of did that for us.
Yeah.
And some of that was like I used generally 2 layers, so kind of a formatted version of the vocal plus a heavily formatted like 6 or 7 semitone version, which I then filtered.
Yeah.
So you just had this kind of rumbly gravel almost. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then Mr. Minkler obviously took that and did his thing and kind of beefed it up even further. So, but it was we didn't want the first time he sung to sound utterly fake,
totally different to how he sounded when he was talking. Yeah.
I mean, luckily he starts in the Evermore song. He starts low, so it was kind of fairly easy to achieve.
Bed your ears into to the sound before he.
Exactly, and it was, and also just making it. He was in a kind of a long shot, as I remember, so we were able to give a bit of perspective to hide the change as well.
Yeah,
those kind of tricks.
And so, because we've sort of reached that point, the final mix, what kind of choices went into the final mix of how the songs sound? How did you approach the sort of the realism versus the attaching the voice to the mouth and while still wanting it to sound like a sort of a Disney, a big Disney production number. What's the approach?
Well, I think there was two approaches. If it was a more intimate song, we have like Maurice, who's Belle's father, just singing at his desk.
Yeah.
That was largely live takes anyway. So in that instance, we're trying to get ultimate realism with hardly any reverb, and it's just as the dialogue would sound. But yeah, it's something like Belle. We were keen for it to sound lush and big and impressive. So, but it was a case of trying to match the dialogue in the first instance, but then slowly shape it into something more musical sounding.
Yeah.
But it was a tricky thing to, where is that sweet spot between? You don't want to perceive that reverb. You don't want to feel it too. It's been too overly produced.
We've all seen musicals where it's just they're just talking in a dry sort of room like we're sitting in now, and then they like switch and they start to sing and they sound like they're in the Carnegie Hall or something.
Yeah, exactly. So it was absolutely, it was at all voice. And in fact, on the Belle Rapide, which is when Emma goes up the mountain at the end of Reel 1, as you know, James.
Yeah.
That I spent ages trying to match that to the dialogue, because it comes straight out of dialogue into singing, and I used all kinds of tricks to trying to make the two things match, and a lot of degrading stuff to get it to match the on-set stuff, obviously, because you got a lot of shash and realism on set. And then sound effects comes into that as well. Stuff starts to float if there's a lack of Foley. I mean, obviously the songs were loud, so the Foley wasn't that. It depended on the song, but
that's the difficult thing during production sometimes, is that the sort of the state of the sound is not, because it's still being worked on.
Yeah.
You don't generally have the Foley at that early stage. Sometimes you overcompensate with the music, I think, and then
that's true.
And then and you try and get the music to do too much. It's only when you've got the full soundtrack at the end you think, oh yeah, I've overcooked this.
Overcooked this bad boy.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. As a whole experience, it was fantastic. Just because the role grew. I mean, I can't think of a film where I have took on more roles, as it were.
Yeah.
And just kind of knowing every single nut and bolt of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Along with Matt, our music producer, just is so invaluable. Because I had a shorthand with Bill. He'd be, oh, what about that heat? Because he's got an amazing memory. What about that take we did? Like 8 months ago of Dan, and
you not only had it, but you had it in sync.
Had it in sync, hopefully. Yeah.
Or very nearly.
Very nearly. There's the odd occasion where there was one song where it got out of sync, and it really annoyed me. But it would have been like a couple of days' work to put it all back in sync. So I didn't do that.
Yeah.
I let myself down.
You could do it now.
Yeah, there's a little
now it's all finished, little side project.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks very much for coming to talk to us today, Chris.
It's an absolute pleasure, James. Great chatting. Thanks. Yeah.